Over on Earth 2, it is something called, actually, Liberation Day. But here in reality, on Earth 1, where all of us reside, it's more like playing a dangerous game of chicken with the American economy for no apparent reason. Brand new reporting reveals that Team Trump is prepping tariffs on potentially trillions of dollars worth of goods from all around the world, practically everything that comes into the United States. It's set to begin on April 2nd. From the Washington Post, quote, senior Trump advisors are now publicly pledging to create a new tariff regime that would impose new duties on trade with most countries that trade with the United States. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent described it this way. Listen.
What's going to happen on April 2nd, each country will receive a number that we believe that represents their tariffs. So for some countries, it could be quite low. For some countries, it could be quite high.
Okay. It's not really clear that he knows exactly what kind of information he's sharing, and it's certainly not clear to most Americans what that means. But economic experts are already sounding the alarm about it. One economist telling the Washington Post this, quote, the last 2 months have already hurt American businesses and consumers, but the April 2nd deadline seriously could make all of that look like a tempest in a teapot. And that is because the United States of America imports $3.2 trillion worth of goods every year. It's not clear what products from what countries will fall under the new tariff regime, but it is worth noting that the tariffs could touch practically every single thing that the American family buys. 97% of all the clothes and shoes sold in the U.S., 97% of all that is imported. A third of all the wine that I drink, I'm kidding, that we drink as a country is imported from abroad. Now, as for electronic devices, the CEO of Best Buy told reporters this, quote, there's very little in the consumer electronic space that is not imported. But according to Donald Trump, tariffs are good.
April 2nd is a liberating day for our country. We're going to be getting back some of the wealth that very, very foolish presidents gave away because they had no clue what they were doing. And April 2nd, I would have made it April 1st, but you know what April 1st is? April Fool's Day.
Yep. So politically speaking, the joke could end up being on him. Tariffs are deeply unpopular with everybody. Certainly with all consumers, no partisan affiliation detected. 61% of Americans say they do not approve of Trump's handling of tariffs. Businesses don't like them either, not even farmers, who Trump claims he loves so much. New York Times reports this, quote, Donald Trump's actions have put U.S. farmers in a tough position. Most agricultural trade groups have opposed tariffs, albeit cautiously. The groups believe that the tariffs will raise prices for farmers, exporters, and consumers, and that retaliatory tariffs, like those that China imposed on farm products like chicken, pork, and soybeans, will harm their industries. And as much as Trump claims to want to support American manufacturing, major U.S. firms hate tariffs too. Once again, from the New York Times, quote, Boeing is the kind of manufacturer, one that exports billions of dollars of goods, that Trump says he wants to protect and nurture. But his tariffs could have the opposite effect on the company's suppliers. Trump has imposed a few tariffs so far, but he says more are coming in just a few weeks. Duties on aluminum and steel, two of the most important raw materials used in aircraft, are expected to raise manufacturing costs. But the industry is far more concerned by tariffs that take effect on goods from Canada and Mexico next month, which could disrupt the highly integrated North American supply chain. Whether the tariffs will actually go into effect, and if they do, on what scale they will be put on other countries, is, when it comes to Trump, always an open question, literally up to the moment when they are to be imposed. And that's given Team Trump's track record, again, just so far in the last 2 months on this issue, the on-again, off-again implementation of tariffs, the sudden reversals, the announcement by tweet that catches everyone by surprise. And that uncertainty in and of itself is also upsetting businesses.
It's hard when you're managing any business to not really know what you're going to be able to do in a month, 3 months, 12 months. It impacts hiring, it impacts purchasing, contracts, that relationships that you have with suppliers.
There is unfortunately a huge amount of uncertainty right now that is affecting boardrooms and investors. If this level of uncertainty persists, it's really damaging the confidence and therefore to business investment, M&A, et cetera.
The uncertainty is what's killing us.
The collective impacts in the short run is people are pausing, they're pulling back. Talking to CEOs throughout the economy, I hear the economy is weakening as we speak.
The lights flashing red on the American economy thanks to Donald Trump's personal, seemingly arbitrary conduct. The tariff threats is where we start today. Anthony Scaramucci is here. He's a former Trump White House communications director, host of the Open Book podcast. Also joining us, former Republican Congressman, MSNBC political analyst David Jolly is here. And with me at the table, anchor and correspondent for Bloomberg News, David Gura is here. He's back. We never let you leave. Am I wrong that the instability is no longer about external events like COVID or things happening in other places? It is about the actions that Donald Trump is taking.
By and large, yes. And this looming date of April 2nd is something that's on the minds, as you heard there, of many CEOs and investors. They're wondering what's going to happen here. And I think a really open question is what happens after April 2nd? So we'll have this broad array of tariffs if the president is to be believed. On trillions of dollars with imports, if we agree with the reporting that we've seen there. What does that mean going forward? How does that policy stand to change? Will there be carve-outs like we saw during the first term? These are all unanswered questions. And then there's this issue of what effect is that going to have on the economy? So you laid out there what academicians say is likely to happen. We don't know how it's going to be in practice. And today we had the Federal Reserve announce it's going to keep interest rates where they are. And Jay Powell, the Fed chair, kind of had to toe this line of noting the fact that short-term inflation expectations are up. He's confident that when you look at medium-term, longer-term ones, you're not seeing that yet. But he's having to look at the economy today, which he characterizes as largely healthy, and have to kind of guess his way through or think what might happen as a result of these policies. That's kind of emblematic of what we're seeing, yes, among central bank policymakers like him, but the heads of companies and regular folks as well.
Anthony, why is he doing this?
Well, I think he's an 18th century Prussian, so he's a colonialist. He wants to take over Canada and Greenland and the Panama Canal, and he's decided that tariffs are sort of an idea that predates the income tax. So just remember, that's a consumption tax for the American people. So said differently to our European friends, it's a VAT. So if he's going to put that in place and we're going to leave the income tax rates where they are, he's going to crush middle and lower middle income consumers, and so they'll stop spending. They'll have to, and he'll touch off a recession here in the United States and then a global recession around the world. So I don't know why they're doing that, because Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick, they know better. His economic team, Kevin Hassett, knows better. I mean, they all know better. So, but he is adamant about this. He put a full page in the New York Times in 1987. And he thinks we're living 50 or 60 years ago without the integration that you described in your opening monologue. So that's what he's doing. No one's going to push him back on it unless the stock market pushes him back on it. And we've had, we're down about 8 or 9% on the market right now. The Fed chair, we rallied today because the Fed chair is telling he's got to cut rates as a result of the turmoil in the market.
Anthony, let me show you Brit Hume's just sort of seeming attempts to stop. I mean, the White House spokesgal has said that tariffs are not a tax. They're a tax cut. Brit Hume seemed intent on, at least among his audience, dispelling the disinformation about tariffs.
That's what tariffs are. They're taxes on goods that are being imported into this country or exported from it. And the tendency of tariffs in the short run in particular is to suppress economic activity. And of course, it also is to drive up prices, and that's how it suppresses economic activity. So it's something I think the administration has to worry about. Chances of higher prices, it seems to me, from tariffs is a legitimate concern.
So the truth of the tariffs, so obvious. Even Fox News is broadcasting the truth on this matter. Say more about people like Mr. Bessent, who we've looked high and low. We can't find any instance where he advocated tariffs. I don't know Mr. Letnick's public record as well, but I looked, searched, and couldn't find any speeches he'd given advocating tariffs. What makes people who are trusted in business come in and do things that they would never do to their own shareholders or their own businesses to the American people?
Well, you know, Scott's last investment letter, I mean, it was maybe 2 investment letters ago, warned about the specter of tariffs. And he basically said that tariffs are a form of a consumption tax and it would slow down and potentially be ruinous to the economy. And so he's done a 180 on that now as Treasury Secretary. So you would be able to find that if you get Scott's investment letter. Howard, I know, was against tariffs until he was for them in the campaign, but they want those seats. They're prestigious seats. They want to walk in and out of the White House. You know, Nicole, it doesn't reflect well on me, but I was there, okay? And I was, you know, I got thankfully fired after 11 days, but I made the decision to do something that was against the, you know, grain. It was against my instincts because my ego was talking to me and my pride. And so these guys have Potomac fever. You know what Potomac fever is because you worked in Washington. And one of the bad things about Potomac fever, Nicole, is that one of the symptoms is you don't know that you have Potomac fever when you have it. And so hopefully these guys will wake up from the fever and say, wow, this was a really big mistake for me and my family and a big mistake for my country. You know, the president's going to keep pushing because he has this idea that this is going to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., but that is a thought long ago. He'd be way better doing what, frankly, President Biden did, which is tax incentives and a fiscal program to reshore manufacturing, bring back chips, bring back other manufacturing centers without putting this burden on the American consumer.
We're tracking one big clash with 2 storylines right now. The clash is the Trump administration on defense after the court setbacks for those weekend deportations, and then the extreme claims to wartime powers during peace. And the Chief Justice rebutting Trump in that rare move we saw yesterday. Conservative media warning the president that breaking court orders is just too far, that it's dangerous. While a Fox News legal expert is rejecting Trump's effort to defy the courts as untenable, writing in the conservative National Review. So, the first storyline is President Trump responding to that criticism and the legal setbacks and this growing controversy with a claimed deference. Trump disavowing any defiance of court orders and pledging not to defy them in the future in this new interview.
Wouldn't in the future.
No, you can't do that.
Now, that's Trump's storyline. You cannot do that. He will not be defying court orders, he says. So this is part one, and I'm going to tell you that in a sense that is a type of good thing. Low bar, but it reinforces how there are limits, there are consequences. That Trump knows it is bad to defy court orders and bad to admit it, and it looks bad, and you don't say you might do it in the future. I'm going to show you a bit more context on that interview coming up. I just wanted to give you that key headline of him saying, no, you can't do that. But none of that means that Donald Trump is telling the whole truth here, especially if this is a situation where the politician knows the truth looks really bad. Because that brings us to the second storyline. And this one is from the Trump officials who are actually trying to wield these wartime powers during peace with no war on, where we have the flight evidence, which shows they are wielding those powers in a way that violated a judge's order. And the administration's top law enforcement official, A.G. Bondi, late today, doing an interview, that's the judge there that oversaw all this, but doing an interview and making the radical claim that federal judges shouldn't be asking questions to get the facts and evidence, shouldn't rule on federal laws like the Alien Enemies Act. Now, Bondi is an experienced lawyer. She knows that is literally a judge's job. And so I'm giving you context before I show what she said, because it is legally fact-check false. The claims she makes here late today, amidst all of this, escalate the very lawlessness that Donald Trump, I just showed you, claims to disavow.
This judge has no right to ask those questions. You have one unelected federal judge trying to control foreign policies, the Alien Enemies Act, which they have no business presiding over. The judge had no business, no power to do what he did. This judge had no right to do that.
False. The federal judge has the right and professional duty to rule on laws and federal government actions. Let's be very clear about what we just heard. What she is describing is an alternative that would be more like an autocratic system where the leader of the government cannot be held to account by any other branch of government, where their actions or wartime powers, if they claim them, simply cannot be questioned. This is Donald Trump's handpicked AG. She was the second choice after extremist Matt Gaetz. She runs the DOJ. She's suggesting and claiming she will also send more flights in violation of this order. Her lawyers at DOJ are also stonewalling the judge in this very case, which, again, speaks to the tension here. So keep that in mind as we hear, now in more context, Donald Trump's new interview remarks.
And judges
would you
that were
defy
so
a court
corrupt.
order? Because that we all know that, and that was
I
outrageous.
never did defy a court order.
And you wouldn't in the future?
No, you can't do that. However, we have bad judges. We have very bad judges, and these are judges that shouldn't be allowed. I think at a certain point you have to start looking at what do you do when you have a rogue judge. The judge that we're talking about, you look at his other rulings. I mean, rulings unrelated, but having to do with me, he's a lunatic.
Now, that is a Trump-style thing you just heard, but politicians can use words. They can criticize other branches of government. You can call the judge a lunatic. It's not what most presidents have done, but you can do it. What he said there, though, was that he claims, I didn't defy the court order, like I told you, and I won't do it in the future. So, again, that's storyline one from Donald Trump, and it reinforces the fact that we still live in a country where that's not allowed. There are a lot of ways that the courts can still enforce their authority, and that a heck of a lot of people around Donald Trump, I just showed you, including loud voices on the right, don't want to go full Russia or China or you name it. But compare what Donald Trump claims there to what his own aides, which again, he is empowering, the buck stops with him, what he claims to what they say they're going to do.
And judges
would you
that were
defy
so
a court
corrupt.
order? Because that we all know that, and that was outrageous.
I never did defy a court order.
I don't care what the judges think. I don't care what the left thinks. We're coming.
And you wouldn't in the future?
No, you can't do that.
The administration may continue doing these flights? Absolutely.
No, we won't do it in the future. Yes, we will. And Attorney General Bondi's only authority comes from being the Attorney General serving under the power of President Trump. So he is responsible for what they're saying, even if this is a accidental or deliberate, lawful cop, autocratic cop, double message. Trump also assailing the judge in the case. As I showed you, the Supreme Court may ultimately have the last word here. Justice Roberts weighed in, which is a type of public pushback, but he did not say, nor should he, how he would ultimately rule. There's also reports that Trump officials want a multi-pronged, methodically planned strategy here to play out, where they'll get the court, they hope, to give Trump new, broader deportation powers with vastly fewer judicial restraints. That is sourced to the top officials. It is similar to what I've told you in our legal reporting on this very show before this got as much public attention. They are willing to lose at the lower court and push the bounds because they're hoping to get rulings out of the Supreme Court that give them more powers. Now, I can't tell you what the Supreme Court will do, but I can tell you that historically the court does not usually grant wartime powers during peace. And when the Trump administration was asked to provide specifics in the ongoing case here, which is still at the district level, about when these flights took off, the DOJ stonewalled. And they wrote, again, this is the actual thing they're doing in court, under AG Bondi, whose authority comes from President Trump, quote, continuing to beat a dead horse solely for the sake of prying from the government legally immaterial facts is not something the judge should do or they should have to comply with. And the judge has given the DOJ another day to respond, and that piece will play out. The larger thing here between these two storylines that I'm telling you about is the test that we are going through. It is a test of how much people care and whether people are tuned out. It's a test of whether people around Trump look at the signs I showed you from Murdoch's empire and other concerned conservatives. But this is also a test, and I want to remind you this, that is only happening right now at this speed with some accountability possibly because people took the administration to court. This whole thing was a weekend effort. It was the ACLU that actually brought that case in. There are other cases that are pending because of groups and citizens and lawyers who are doing the work. Some of them get a lot of attention. I would admit to you on the news, with the amount of time we have, some of them are important. They don't always get the attention. But that's also part of the test, the people doing the work. And in a lot of parts of the country, I've also told you about how legal federalism, the idea that states have independent power, is going to be very important in these 4 years as we see these federal powers, wartime powers, being seized and tested to see what they can do, who they can grab up, who they can deport, whether those people will ever be fact-checked, whether the flights will be fact-checked. And some of that action in the states is more important than ever.
I mean, what's the end goal here, Aaron? Is it to discredit this judge, discredit his decision, punish him personally? What's happening here?
Yeah, I think some of those things may be incidental, really. You think about the way President Trump has spoken throughout the course of this presidency, all the years that he was out of office and the time that he was in office before. This sort of rhetoric, this language that we're hearing from him, criticizing and demeaning people who he perceives as working against him and working against some of his goals, this is language that is familiar. This is very much consistent with his style. I think more substantively, if you look at some of these court cases, the administration is making the point that it is going to fight. They believe that President Trump does have ultimate authority to do all the things that he's done, despite the dozens of legal challenges that we've seen across the last several months, really, involving different agencies and different actions that the administration has taken. We've seen time and again that the Department of Justice has sent their lawyers into these courtrooms before these judges to argue against challenges to President Trump's authority, and they've appealed decisions that judges have put in place, pausing some of the efforts that have been underway over these many months, Chris. And so I think ultimately what you're going to see is President Trump continuing to use the language that he's used and the Department of Justice continuing to push back against these challenges to his authority. And as new challenges pop up, I think you can expect to see the administration continue to fight as many of these cases, or at least some of these issues, are likely to end up in the Supreme Court. The question then becomes what happens when it gets to that level and a decision comes down from the highest court in the land, Chris.
So, Jeremy, bigger picture, this does appear to be a fight that this administration wants to have. Take a listen.
This is about a wholesale shift on what a terrorist is and how they should be treated in the United States. And of course, that is going to present an Article 2, Article 3 in the Constitution conflict. But really, that's what this is. And this is squarely under the commander-in-chief's authority to keep Americans safe. And I'm telling you, that's how most Americans see it.
So that's obviously the national security director. There's a messaging effort here. I mean, it included right when they got all of the Venezuelan deportees. They put out all that video. They showed them getting their heads shaved. They showed them bent over, handcuffed. They were restrained at the ankles. Talk about the audience for all of this and the message that they're trying to send.
Right. Well, these scenes were very reminiscent of what happened in 2001 at Guantanamo Bay, right? You know, the shackled prisoners, this, you know, putting them into very primitive facilities. And no doubt that is the message that this administration wants to convey. You ask about, you know, who those images are for. Those images are not just a, you know, political effort for Trump's base, kind of red meat, if you will. Those are meant to be seen by people who would potentially cross the border, make the journey up from Central America as a warning. Don't come here, you will be sent back. Obviously, it's a pretty harsh, jarring warning, but that is the policy purpose here, and there's, as I said, a political purpose as well. But you know, as Lisa said, you know, there is a real tension here with a question about what constitutes national security. And the administration has taken a very, very broad interpretation of what they see, what they are justifying with saying, oh, this is related to national security. This is related to the foreign policy interests of the country. Now, the president does have broad authority there, but Congress also has authority. And they've passed laws like the Patriot Act that have very specifically spelled out what the president can and cannot do with regard to terrorism. So, it's going to be a fight. Mike Waltz is exactly right. There's going to be a fight about whether or not Congress needs to change the law in order for Trump to do some of what he's doing with these deportations, not just of migrants, but of more political targets, like the student we have who is now sitting in a detention facility in Louisiana awaiting deportation.
Yeah, and with all those things happening, Michael, there's been a lot of discussion about whether we're headed for a constitutional crisis. But the New York Times' Adam Liptak writes this, quote, legal scholars say that is no longer the right inquiry. Mr. Trump is already undercutting the separation of powers at the heart of the constitutional system, they say. And the right question now is, how will it transform the nation? Are they right about that?
Adams is absolutely right. We're here. We've been in it since, the last couple of months of this administration.
There's only been a couple months of the administration.
Right.
And not even, I think.
I had to think for a moment there, Chris. It feels a little bit like 2 years, but yes, It's been 2 months. I think that reporting is spot on where we are. Lisa knows this very well from her reporting and coverage of this and seeing the transformation around these very what would otherwise been pillars of our constitutional democracy being chipped away at. And here's the part that is so aggravating and galling to me, and I'm sure to a lot of Americans, is that our elected current leadership is wholly feckless in both ways, either not responding and letting it happen, Republican members of the House and Senate, or not having a clue how to address it and push back against it if you're a member of the Senate House Democratic caucus. And that's the frustrating part. This is now left to the American people exactly where the founders always wanted it to be. And this country's direction rests in our hands, not in the hands of elected leaders, because they have been summarily either bought and paid off with power and promises that they won't be touched, or are standing there in the corner shuddering and cowering, afraid to figure out exactly how to push back because, well, we've never done this before. We haven't been here before. None of us have been here before. None of us want to be here. But damn it, you got to stand up at this moment and say enough. We're now at the last wall, folks. It's called the courts. It's the last wall. And the only thing we're doing right now is, sort of sitting back, waiting and anticipating, when will Donald Trump refuse to obey a court order? Well, damn it, he's already done it. The plane landed. All right? The plane landed.
And there's actually an indication, Jeremy, that the American people are reacting to this because there's this new NBC News poll. 43% of Americans believe the executive branch has too much power, compared to 28% who say that about the judiciary, and only 18% say Congress has too much power. So what's your sense of the American people and whether they have any sway with the members of Congress who they elected to do what they wanted them to do? And seems to be being interpreted as not about members of Congress, but that Donald Trump was elected to have carte blanche.
Yeah, well, members of Congress right now seem only responsive on the Republican side to President Trump and his wishes and whims because they believe that's what their voters elected them to do. They have not exactly shown a lot of spine in standing up to Trump. And in fact, they have gone so far as to give up certain authority to him. Just look at what happened with the budget showdown just this last week. I mean, the Republicans went from being, the party that exerted their desire to see more fiscal discipline and austerity, as Michael Steele well knows, through the Congress to basically just saying, okay, we'll do whatever the president and Elon Musk want us to do. I don't know voters who are paying all that close of attention to the ins and outs. I mean, the conversations that I have had with people who are conducting focus groups, with people who are in the congressional districts, are kind of what you would expect. The shutdown debate isn't really registering. People are concerned about what they're always concerned about, their ability to make ends meet and to have a comfortable life. To the extent that the Republican control and Trump control of government, all three branches, starts to impact that well-being and comfort, then I think you're going to see something different.
Michael, I only have a minute left, but I do want to ask you about what Eugene Robinson wrote in the Washington Post today. He makes the argument the president keeps distracting us with shiny objects, like attacking Canada or canceling Hunter Biden's Secret Service protection. Quote, every day is a new episode of Trump's reality show and another opportunity for boffo ratings. But each day is also another step in the weakening of the rule of law and the undemocratic, un-American concentration of power in one man's hands. Do you have any advice for Americans who are trying to separate what's real from the distraction? Because it is hard to follow the bouncing ball, and people who come up to me, the number one word I hear from them, I'm guessing you too, is exhausted.
Yes, exactly. Gene crafts an excellent piece in that piece that you pulled out there really is the end game. That is the end game. I'm going to throw a lot of things up in the air, and I know the press and the politicos well enough that they will go down each of those rabbit holes and get lost in those storylines, fretting over whether or not we're going to invade Greenland or the back and forth between Canada and the United States. All of that is just melodrama, that sort of subtext storylines that entice and make you want to eat more of that popcorn while you're watching this unfold. Meanwhile, not really paying full attention to what we've been talking about here, which is the rights you have as a citizen, the rights you have as an individual with a green card, the rights that you have as someone who is running away from and seeking asylum and avoiding persecution. Our Constitution was designed to protect you on this soil. Our courts are designed to enforce that protection within the confines and the requirements of the rule of law. Our political leadership are there to.
Joining us now, President and CEO of the National Constitution Center, Jeffrey Rosen. What's at stake here? What's the bottom line?
What's at stake is the independence of the judiciary and the rule of law. Chief Justice Roberts' statement could not have been more serious. He has twice before rebuked first President Trump and then Senator Chuck Schumer for trying to call for the politicization of the judiciary. But it's very important that Chief Justice Roberts said for more than 200 years, there's been a bipartisan tradition that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement with a judicial decision. He was referring to the sole impeachment of a Supreme Court justice, of Chief Justice Samuel Chase in 1804. And Chief Justice Chase was acquitted in 1805 because of the principle that you can't impeach judges because you disagree with their rulings. And that acquittal was supported by Chief Justice John Marshall, who is Chief Justice John Roberts' hero. So this is a very serious and significant statement by the Chief Justice that for more than 200 years, there has been a bipartisan agreement that you cannot impeach judges because you disagree with their rulings. This is not just some small spat. What is at stake is the fundamental independence of the judiciary and the nonpartisan legitimacy of the rule of law.
Jeffrey, what do you make of the argument we've heard from President Trump, from the Trump administration, but from members of the media that support Donald Trump, that effectively Chief Justice Roberts made a political statement yesterday when he came out and said this, that he was effectively taking the side of those opposed to Donald Trump's deportation efforts. Do you see politics in this at all?
This is the opposite of politics. Chief Justice Roberts said that politics must play no role in attempts to remove judges. And in fact, in Chief Justice Roberts' end-of-year report, which was issued before the Trump administration, he decried criticism of judges by both Democratic and Republican partisans on the basis of disagreement with their rulings. It is urgently important to recognize that the Chief Justice is saying it doesn't matter if you're a Republican, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat. If you disagree with a judicial decision, you appeal it. And ultimately, the Supreme Court has the last word. This is the very, very serious attempt to keep politics out of the judiciary.
Well, and Claire, you look at Chief Justice Roberts' actions, the few times that he has spoken out in the past or visualized or verbalized anything, you see it's bipartisan. And it's when people are trying to drag the Supreme Court into American politics. And we had this statement following what Donald Trump had written on Truth Social. We had what he wrote after Chuck Schumer held a press conference that many judicial observers found to be deeply concerning. We remember when Barack Obama talked about Citizens United with them right there, and the justices started shaking their heads. And even in his rulings with Obamacare, when he had a ruling on Obamacare and surprised a lot of people by refusing to overturn Obamacare, Chief Justice Roberts, and I think it's really the line that defines where he stands on politics, he said, don't ask us to do here what you can do at the ballot box next fall. Not our job. And so he's given it to both sides anytime he's seen judicial independence challenged or threatened, and has said, we are not Republicans, we are not Democrats, we are judges.
Yeah, the difference between Roberts calling out Schumer and calling out Trump, excuse me, is that Schumer the next day actually walked it back and said, I got carried away, and basically said I shouldn't have said what I said. Obviously, we're not going to hear that from Trump. You know, Jeffrey, I'd like to talk to you about the politicization of the judiciary writ large and what impact that's having, the bleed over to the federal system. I don't think enough Americans understand the difference between our Article III federal courts and our local courts. And what we're seeing in Wisconsin right now is a full-out partisan political fight for the Supreme Court in Wisconsin. With Elon Musk putting hundreds of millions of dollars of his personal money to try to promote the right-wing Republican judge that is trying to take a seat on the Supreme Court. Talk about the state courts and what impact that's having on this lack of trust and the politicalization of the courts, because I think people don't realize the bright line and the differences between our federal judiciary, which ultimately has responsibility for interpreting the Constitution, and these local races that have become so political under the Trump era.
You're so right that it's important to understand the difference. Of course, federal judges are appointed for life. Many state court judges are elected, and therefore there's a great danger of politicization in state courts. But this is why Chief Justice Marshall thought that there was an existential threat to the judiciary if you could impeach judges because you disagree with your decisions. If you do that, then judges become political actors, and they can be literally voted out of office. And that's why the Senate's decision to acquit Chief Justice Chase established the independence of the judiciary for the next 200 years. It's really striking that President Trump said in his attack on Judge Boasberg, no one elected him. He didn't win any electoral votes. Of course, that's the very point of the judiciary, is that they're not elected, but that they can decide without fear or favor based on the rule of law. So once you have politicians attacking judges and saying they can be removed because you don't agree with their decisions, then state court judges will become even more politicized. The federal courts will become politicized. And the one thing standing between us and total partisanship, which is the rule of law, will be under threat.
Yeah. President and CEO of the National Constitution Center, Jeffrey Rosen. Jeffrey, thanks so much. Always good to have you on the show. Chris, tomorrow marks 2 months of this administration. So much has happened in just those 2 months. Curious in total what you think about what we've seen so far. The courts are pushing back. We saw yesterday that USAID will be reinstated. The trans in the military has been reversed by a court yesterday. You go down the list, the courts are pushing back, but broadly, obviously, this administration has taken a slash and burn approach to the government, firing employees. We saw, you mentioned the Zelensky meeting, this new approach to Russia and Ukraine on foreign policy. What do you make of everything we've seen?
Just take the Republican Party, not even everybody, just the Republican Party. Back in '52, Eisenhower gave up his role as Supreme Commander of NATO so he could run for the Republican nomination and keep Robert Taft from becoming the nominee. First of all, Taft would have lost perhaps to Adlai Stevenson, but he was definitely an America firster. He was a total isolationist. He said, no, the Republican Party is an international party. We're going to fight the communists. And he won. And so that has held. Both parties have agreed with this ever since '52. They've all believed in NATO. And now this guy comes along. Not only does he not believe in that, he doesn't believe in containment. He's welcoming Russia to take over. He's welcomed them to grab a big piece of Ukraine. God knows what's next. And the problem he has with this guy is nothing's compared to Hitler. Nobody compares anybody to Hitler. But the fact is that Putin is not accepting it. He did on the phone yesterday. I will not stop being an aggressor. I am the aggressor. Got it? I'm the one gobbling up a little country next door. That's what I'm doing. And I got my eyes on Belarus. Oh, by the way, I got my eyes on the Baltic states and maybe Poland. I got my eyes on that. So why would I stop here? I'm not stopping here. Hitler didn't stop here. He grabbed after he got the Sudetenland. He gobbled up Prague. He took all of Czechoslovakia. He didn't wait a minute, really. And so this guy doesn't want a minute. He doesn't want to stop. He's Putin. And the only person in the world that doesn't know he's Putin is the president. And it's unbelievable how dumb he seems. And I don't think he's dumb. I don't think Trump is dumb. And the idea that he is stupid about Putin, and it looks like it's going to go on, and this war is going to go on, and the destruction is going to go on of Ukraine. And it's frightening to see an American leader so misdirected.
Well, it's something about Vladimir Putin that misdirects American leaders, as we've said time and time again. You had George W. Bush in 2004 saying he looked into the eyes of Putin and read his soul. 3 years later, Putin declares war on the West at the Munich Security Conference. A year later, he invades Georgia. The United States does nothing about it. So how does Putin respond to that? He hears Barack Obama in 2012 tell Medvedev, the figurehead leader of the country at the time, hey, let's wait till after the election and then we can get a lot more done. 2 years later, Putin goes, OK, I'll get a lot more done. He invades Ukraine. He invades Crimea. He shoots down commercial aircraft time and time again. The United States, he signs a deal in 2019, a ceasefire in 2019 that he violates time and time again. This is what Vladimir Putin does to American leaders. That's one reason the Wall Street Journal editorial's other editorial is talking about what you just talked about, Chris Matthews, the phone call. And I just want to read just a quick portion of it. It said President Trump and Vladimir Putin talked on the phone on Tuesday, and neither side is divulging much of the details. But strip away the diplomatic pieties, and the main result is that Mr. Putin didn't agree to Mr. Trump's 30-day ceasefire, while Ukraine's Zelensky did. Have we figured out who the real obstacle to peace is yet? And they go on. And one other thing, too, Mika, just following up on this conversation about Republicans and supporters of President Trump going, oh, my God, Chief Justice Roberts is getting involved in politics. No, again, these judges are not elected. They are appointed. But I will tell you where they do elect Supreme Court judges, up in Wisconsin. And as Claire said, what is Elon Musk doing? He's pouring $10 million from 2 super PACs, maybe a little over $10 million in super PACs into trying to change the outcome of that race. So on one hand, they're saying, oh, judges should not be involved in politics. And on the other, Elon Musk pouring $10 million, $11 million, perhaps $11 million to try to change the outcome of a state judicial race.
Mm-hmm.